Hey y'all, I'm going to go into a little bit more depth about what we talked about in class, and we're going to look at the Atlantic world and transatlantic exchanges beyond the triangular trade. Um, and so this is also focusing time-wise on this like later period of the colonial, after like the 1650s, more into the 1700s. So let's take a look. So the Atlantic world is this idea that they focus a lot on in the AP now, where it's this like circulation and transmission of people, goods, culture, between all of the continents. So mostly it's Africa, West Europe, and South America. So it's this idea that everything is kind of coming together to create a whole new culture, a whole new world. And it goes, the Columbian exchange we talked about before is more of that biological exchange. This is kind of, everything. So we're going to take a look at that now. So I think the first thing, if we're looking at this interchange of ideas and everything else, we should be looking at the people who are coming into what is the modern United States. And so this is kind of an important concept. Let's see if I can get this working. Come on. So there it goes. All right, one thing to look at is this sort of east-west divide. This is the first thing I want you to look at. Who is in the east? If we take a look at the primarily English, but then of course we also have African. So when we come into this area, you have English and Africans. What could we assume about this? These are our plantation owners. These are the rich folks. And even when we get into, well, this was New England, right? These are also the English. And so in the East, you can often think of East as the elite, right? These tend to be more of the elites, the kind of original English settlers. We looked at the colonies, like this was the Chesapeake, this was New England, right? These are the two places they originally settled. And so these people are the first. We took a look at them last lecture. And it is primarily English, and then, of course, over time, African. These are the two biggest groups who are making up America as the colonies. But in this east-west divide, the elite are settling along the east coast. In the west, along the Appalachian Mountains, this is what we are calling the back country. I think that's a nice way for saying like into the hills, right? Into the hills goes the Scots-Irish, who are like Protestant Irish, the Scots, the Germans, right? All of these folks are settling into the back country, essentially because this other land is already taken up by the elites. So in the back country, you have Scots, Irish, English, Africans, right? All kind of mixing it up in the hills, right? In class, we took a look at these interchanges as far as like music, and yeah, right? You have kind of like eventually like bluegrass and the banjo, and this mix of music is just one example. But you have all these different diversity. It's like pluralism. We would also call it diversity happening in the United States. So although we are English colonies, we are not only English. You could take a look at the number of people from other places, and it's obvious. I do want to focus a minute on these middle colonies, Pennsylvania, New York, right? They are going to be coming in later. So we started with New England and the Chesapeake, and these middle colonies are going to fill in. And this is where you're going to get a lot of immigrants. You're going to get a lot of Germans and a lot of Scots-Irish moving into Pennsylvania. It is one of the more diverse places. It is also usually kind of more accepting. So in Pennsylvania and New York, you have many more immigrants, and they kind of fill in a little bit later as well. We're going to take a look at what these folks are doing. So in all these different regions, you have New England. Over time, New England is going to move away from its like city upon a hill and focus more on its capitalism, on shipping, manufacturing, and their primary export is going to be lumber and fish or cod. In the middle, in our Pennsylvania and New York, they are going to be the breadbasket. So these are going to be farmers who are like, doing wheat and corn for the rest of the colonies. And in the South, you have your cash crops. In South Carolina, which comes a little bit later from the Chesapeake, they're going to have rice and indigo. And in the Chesapeake, Virginia, Maryland, it's still tobacco. So, just to take a look, the merchants in New England, they are the ones kind of taking like sugar, exchanging it for money. We're going to take a look at this more specifically, dealing with manufactured goods. They're trading with our middle colonies for wheat. In our middle colonies, we have what's called yeoman farmers, and also in the back country. These are farmers who work their own land. Many of them are German and Scots-Irish, middle-class English. So they need tools, they need their consumer goods, and often these folks are in debt, and often they're living in this back country. And then in the South, we have enslaved Africans. Indentured servitude is just going to kind of wane out over time. And then you have our planters, or our slave owners, and only 25% of whites owned slaves. So you have the slaveocracy in the South. You have yeoman farmers who are making the breadbasket, many of them immigrants in those middle colonies. And then you have New England, who's primarily becoming manufacturers and merchants and these sort of things. So we're going to take a look at mercantilism one more time. In the 1650s, they're going to war with the Dutch. And so when they make the first navigation acts in 1651, they're primarily focusing on not trading with the Dutch. That is their big thing. And so what they're trying to do is say, do not trade with the Dutch, only trade with the English. They are limiting free trade, and they are saying you can only use English ships. So there are navigation acts in 1650, there are navigation acts in 1660, there are navigation acts in 1690. All of these navigation acts, if I was to use a verb for them, it is to promote or to legislate or to regulate trade, right? And to promote mercantilism. So I'd say they are acts, they are laws. So they're regulating trade to promote mercantilism, right? So in 1660, you cannot trade sugar, tobacco, wool, or indigo with any of the other places, right? Except for English land. So this is the concept of mercantilism, creating that closed system where you never pay another dollar to another country. And just to review, right, the colony exists only for the mother country. Trade is a zero-sum game. If we pay $1 to the Dutch are winning, and we are going to tax imports, and it creates this competitive need for more colonies. And so a lot of times when we talk about mercantilism, people like to talk about the triangular trade, and it is a thing, right? I'm not saying it's not true. So if I was a boat in, let's say, North America, I would load my boat up with raw materials in North America: sugar, cotton, tobacco. Well, not cotton yet. Tobacco is the primary thing, and rice, right? I would take it to England. There, England would take it, and then you're never going to want to have an empty ship, so I'm going to take manufactured goods. These manufactured goods are often weapons or rum to Africa. And then from Africa, we are bringing enslaved Africans. This is the Middle Passage, right? And so this is this idea of triangular trade. And what it's doing is it's putting Europe right at the center. It's putting England, our mother country, right at the center. And they are going to make money by kind of taxing everything, by bringing everything out. Now, the other thing, though, is what's coming from Europe is manufactured goods. So this doesn't even look at that. All right, so this misses a lot of things, and we're going to take a look at that. So a more complex view, even just of the economy, is one of the main things that England is doing is it's sending back manufactured goods, right? And so their manufactured goods, these are going to be the luxuries, our tea sets, our fashions, our silks, our nails, our windows, right? Anything that is manufactured is going to be coming from England, and England is going to, right, tax it. Where are they getting the raw materials? From the colonies, and then they're sending it back to the colonies. This is also one part of the trade. And then the other part is, so this is also part of it. England is basically, the colonies are there to serve the mother country. The mother country is there to sell back manufactured goods. Richard Hakluyt talked about this. This is another part of the trade that is happening. Now, there is also, some other things that are going on, and that is in New England. So, according to mercantilism, shouldn't the, mother country be kind of have its hand in all trade? And under the Navigation Acts, aren't we supposed to, only be trading with the mother country? This is indeed what was supposed to happen, but is not what was happening. So let's take a look at this. If I can. Come on. All right. We'll just go. All right. So in this map, you can kind of see, you have our New England, our Puritans, right? Our good little Puritans in New England. They are going to be kind of like cutting out the mother country on this trade. So in this trade, they are going to take and carry rum to Africa. And what are they going to be? First of all, why are these Puritans making rum? Well, they're going to take it to Africa, and then they're going to pick up slaves. And then when they get their slaves, they take it to, the colonies. And often I want to say they would be doing this not just to English colonies, but also Dutch colonies. They would often pick up sugar from Dutch colonies. They would be smuggling sugar from Dutch colonies and then taking it back to New England. What are they going to do with that sugar? They're going to turn it into rum. So the New Englanders are cutting out England. They're making their own manufactured rum. They are creating their own slave trade, and they are smuggling. So New Englanders are making a lot of money smuggling and trading and doing all of this themselves. And yeah, this is going to be one of the major things that's going to influence the American Revolution. But for the time, England was like, well, we're just going to look the other way. We're going to engage in what's called salutary neglect, and they kind of let England do it. So I guess economically, one thing to remember as far as transatlantic exchanges is you're getting a lot of your luxury goods from Europe. You are having trade that is engaged all over, the place. It's not only coming from, England or Europe. It is also coming from Africa. And we have gold and ivory coming from Africa as well. So this Atlantic world is much more than just triangular trade. All right. One other thing that's happening in this Atlantic world is ideas are being exchanged from one place to the other, and we are creating whole new ideas. And so in the late 1600s, we are going to have the scientific revolution or the Enlightenment. And, we could start by looking at Newton, right? Newton's laws. This is physics. He looks out into the world and is asking, why do things move the way they do? And what he finds is there are natural laws that explain why things move the way they move, or natural laws. And so, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Force equals mass times acceleration, right? When Newton finds these laws, it is amazing because, we're not just going to say God is the one who dictates these rules. It is, there are laws in the world that if you observe, you can find them. So this is the Enlightenment. And when people start to look at, well, why do we have a king? The old explanation is divine right. We have a king because God made a king. It's chosen by God. So that explanation doesn't really fly in the face of natural law. Well, we can't just say God did it. We can't just say God moved that apple. We can't say God put the king in. So we have to look for natural laws as far as why do we have a king? Why do we live in these societies? And I also want to say that when we look at transatlantic exchanges, they are also looking at Native American societies, and they have to be able to explain, well, how is it that Native Americans are living like they are living, which was much different, more democratic, less gender inequalities, all these things. And they have to explain that as well. So they start talking about this idea of a state of nature, and we're going to take a closer look at some of these ideas in Kendi. But, on the positive note, what they start to say is like, there is a social contract, and there is two different kind of ideas about the social contract. Hobbes says life is nasty, brutish, and short. Essentially, we give up power because if we didn't, we would all die, right? Like, I give up my power to stab you in the eye because I don't want to be stabbed in the eye. And so essentially, we give our power to a, king or a despot because it is safer. And then Locke kind of develops this idea of natural rights, that we have rights and we give them up because it's better. But under the social contract theory, it is a contract. If the king or the rulers do not live up to their side, if it's not better with them in power, we have the right to take that power back. And this is the social contract theory. And so, the idea is that governments are created to create these orderly societies. We need to have separation of powers. We need to have religious tolerance. We need to have natural rights. And so there are ideas that this is a truth in the world, right? And this is kind of like an observable truth. So in America, a lot of people are tying into these Enlightenment ideas. There are a lot of deists in the United States, including like Franklin and Jefferson. They are not the most religious of folks. We have a lot of liberal arts universities, and we take it in this kind of idea of like practicality and usefulness. But obviously the most significant idea of the Enlightenment is going to be influencing the American Revolution. In the Declaration of Independence, you can see the ideas of the social contract theory, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All right. So, yeah. The other thing after the Enlightenment is, and kind of along with the Enlightenment, is this idea of challenging the established churches. In America, right, one of these transatlantic exchanges is we get ideas about society coming from Native Americans to Europe. Europe is taking that and turning it into the Enlightenment and sending it back to America. And because of this Enlightenment thinking and because of other things, we start to have these churches that were transported from Europe to America, and they are not transplanting well. The Puritan Church, the Anglican Church, these are all very ordered churches based on class. And as people are living in the frontier, as they are learning these Enlightenment ideas, they are not as popular by the time we get to like 1700. People are leaving the church. People are not joining the Puritan Church in New England. They're trying to get people into the Puritan Church with what's called the halfway covenant, essentially saying it's hereditary now. And so the churches are not reaching out. They are not reaching Americans. They are not really kind of like taking off. And so the First Great Awakening comes from Europe. This is George Whitefield. He is going to come from England, and he's going to come to America, and he's just going to basically light a fire underneath people. He does a revival meetings. Everyone loves George Whitefield. They are like, hey, whenever he says the word Mesopotamia, I'm going to melt, right? People would come from miles just to like watch him. And he is going to start this, Great Awakening. So an itinerant preacher, he would go from like place to place. You can think of it just even in this very simple matter. He is bringing the church to the people. He is not expecting these people in the back country to go to the churches. So people go to him. The thing about it is it's very emotional. So people felt whether or not they were converted. If we looked at the old Puritan way, you had to prove in your mind and prove to other people's minds that you were one of the elect, that you were one of the converted. Under the Great Awakening, you would just feel it, right? You would just know you were converted because of this emotional experience. It's also more egalitarian. They believe more people can be saved. And so people are really listening to this message. Now, I will say this. Not everyone was always, going to these events for to be saved. Some folks, I don't know why this isn't working today. Some folks would go for other reasons. If you look at this picture, there is a guy over here, right? He is kind of like drinking. He's hanging out. He might not be there for the best of reasons. I think my favorite, story about George Whitefield is that he would go into these towns, he would cause stampedes, people were so excited to see him. But the other story is that he could like preach through anything, and he's just like, right, all emotional. And some people would come just to kind of make fun of him, and they would throw things at him. And I don't know, there was some source I read where they were like, they would throw old tomatoes and carrots and then pieces of dead cat. So anyway, George Whitefield would have to preach while some like yahoos in the back were throwing pieces of dead cat at him. I don't know. It sounds like a scene. George Whitefield, right? People love him. He is sparking religious enthusiasm, emotion. He's also kind of preaching individualism. You can know whether or not you're saved. You don't have to listen to other people. It's actually very similar to Anne Hutchinson. There's a focus on this rebirth and this emotional experience. It's also evangelical, meaning they're trying to convert other people. He's bringing the church to the people. He's bringing out, and he's challenging these established churches. People are leaving the established Puritan church. They are leaving the Anglican church. They are even leaving the Catholic church. They are becoming Methodist. They are becoming Baptist. They are doing all these things. So, Phyllis Wheatley is a poet. She is enslaved. She was brought over from Senegal, Gambia, and she was brought to Boston. Her New England owners are going to teach her to read, and she is going to become a famous poet. Her first poem is on the death of George Whitefield. Hail the happy saint on the immortal throne, possessest of glory, life, and bliss unknown. We hear no more the music of thy tongue, the wanton auditories cease to throng. Thy sermons unequaled. She loved this guy, right? So, Whitefield, she loves him. When he dies, she is very sad. Jonathan Edwards is going to be the kind of heir apparent to George Whitefield. He is the American version of George Whitefield, and he's going to kind of take off. His most famous sermon is called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And I do want to say this. It is weird, but in this First Great Awakening, they still believe in predestination, right? He basically says it is only because, right, you are a spider hanging over the pit of hell, and it is only because God has grace that you are not cast into the fiery pit of hell. It's very emotional, but also there's also predestination. You don't really have a say. It is God who has a say. So there is still predestination, but what they're doing is they're saying it's emotional. You can know whether or not you are saved by these feelings. Everyone can be saved. You just have to go through this process. So Phyllis Wheatley also, is a good example of the equality, all right, that is, and we're going to kind of talk about this when we take a look at Kendi. I'm using air quotes, which you can't see. And, it did reach out to enslaved Africans as well. The Black Baptist Church is going to start taking off during this First Great Awakening. And Phyllis Wheatley does, in her way, challenge, right, the First Great Awakening to accept Africans as, being able to be saved. And this is, that. So the First Great Awakening challenges Calvinist belief of predestination and does promote individualism. I do say challenged, but it does still hold on to elements of predestination because it is God who chooses. Individuals are the ones who can go into this salvation. It goes into equality, right? And so these are all things about the First Great Awakening. There are a lot of critics of the First Great Awakening. Some people call him Dr. Squintum. You could guess why. And the critics are going to, of course, be the established churches. The Puritan preachers did not like Whitefield. And also people were also critical of him because of, same as today's evangelical preachers, you're just out for money and fame. You're not a good person, right? People are out here not to hear the word of God. They're just out here because it's a big party and they want to throw dead cats at you. I don't know. Anyway, there are critics of this. So I think the big thing about this, you have to know these transatlantic exchanges. You have to know your navigation acts for that short answer. And I think the document that is in that list is going to be Ben Franklin, who is an Enlightenment thinker, but he is so impressed by George Whitefield. He kind of talks about this First Great Awakening. Yeah. And so, think about this Atlantic world. People are coming into America, and they aren't just people. They are also bringing their ideas, their culture. And then as they are living out their experience in America, they are changing culture. They are adding to the culture. They are bringing it back to Europe. They are bringing parts of Africa with them. They are bringing all these things. We have these exchanges that are going on all over the world. It is not just a triangular trade. We have goods being exchanged on every single direction. And it is creating what is called the Atlantic world. That is it. I guess the one thing that's going to kind of lead into the next class, and I'll give you kind of a little like lead in, is this idea of salutary neglect. While the navigation acts are in place, they are not being followed, right? New England is probably the worst smugglers, right? We talked about their rum. They're going into these Dutch ports. These coasts are basically unguarded, and this idea of salutary neglect means that England knows they're doing it. It's kind of like a kid. Like, I know you are, maybe going out at night too late. I know you might be drinking, but as like a mother, I'm just going to engage in salutary neglect. I'm just going to say, hey, as long as you like do well in school, you don't make a lot of trouble, I'm not going to say anything about it. So salutary neglect is like nice neglect. It's like, oh, just kind of looking the other way, giving people freedom. I'm not being too crazy, right? And that is essentially what England is doing. They know people are smuggling, but they just don't really care, and they don't bother to enforce it. So while we have the navigation acts in place, there is a lot of stuff going on. So that is it, right? So for the short answer, I posted up a review. I'll try and do that. This is from another guy, but I thought I did a good job of kind of going over all the different rebellions, which you need to know. Essentially, for these primary sources, which is almost all of them, you need to know what is the point of view. Think about what are they doing. That's what I'm asking about with point of view. What is the cause? What is the effect, right? Hakluyt, John Smith, Winthrop, Hutchinson, Navigation Acts, Bacon's Rebellion, Ben Franklin for the First Great Awakening, Stonewall Rebellion, and the Pueblo Revolt. Alright guys, good luck. That'll be on Monday, and yeah.